Today I'm going to be discussing two truly amazing coincidences. So I did some research and I looked up a lot of different stories, but some of them were not very credible. They didn't seem to have any kind of proof. And so I decided to just stick with these two that were not only amazing, but were very credible. So the first case I'm going to be talking about today is about a set of twins that were very similar in many ways. So this pair of twins was born in 1940 and they were separated at birth. And the adopted parents, they knew about the other twin, but they didn't know where they lived, and so they really didn't have any communication with the other twins at all. So I guess the very first coincidence that they shared in common was that they were both named John by their parents. Growing up, they both had dogs that had the same name, Toy. As children, they both, liked the same subjects in school. They both liked math and woodworking. They were both bad at spelling. And when they became adults, they both married a woman named Linda. Both of the marriages would end up failing, and so they would both go on to remarry. And what's remarkable is that they would end up marrying a woman with the exact same name. So they both married a woman named Betty. And then to top it all off, they both had children, and they both had sons. And remarkably, they gave them their sons the exact same name, which was James Allen. So I found this really fascinating and bizarre, that they would have the same name. Not only that, but their spouses, the ones that they originally married and then the ones that they remarried would have the exact same name, and that their children will also have the same name. This is really interesting. Both had similar habits. They were both heavy smokers. They drove the same car. They had the same kind of job. One was a security guard. One was a deputy sheriff. And so one day when they were 39, they decided to meet. I guess somehow they found out of each other somehow. And so they started talking, and then they realized, how much they had in common and all these bizarre coincidences. So I guess then word got around and they became quite famous, and then they were invited to do a study. Researchers at the University of Minnesota decided to study them, and they took a bunch of tests, and it was remarkable because they basically gave the same answers on all these tests. And when they were asked to draw a picture, they both drew the same picture. So this was truly an amazing coincidence, and it just shows you how much genetics has an impact on who we are and who we develop as. But it also raises, the question about how much freedom we really have in determining who we are. Are we free to choose and decide our own fate, or are we predestined to become who we are because of genetics? I mean, we could possibly take this to the extreme and think of a situation where these twins were brought up in two different worlds, where everything is exactly identical, atom for atom, and it would be interesting to see if they lived exactly the same life. And if that were the case, then I suppose that we really don't have any free will at all, and we are destined to become who we are because of genetics. And that would be actually, I think, pretty sad that we have no choice in becoming who we are. This next coincidence is truly amazing. I remember reading about it when I was a child, being completely floored by how strange this coincidence was. So this was about a book that was published in 1894, and it was published by a man named Morgan Robertson. The title of the book was The Wreck of the Titan, and it describes the ship, the Titan, which was this huge, unsinkable ship. It was described as unsinkable, and it was, the height of luxury and comfort. So this huge ship ends up hitting an iceberg in the North Atlantic Ocean on an April night, and it kills 2,987 people as it sinks. So this obviously sounds very familiar, right? It's actually very similar to what happened to the RMS Titanic, which was a huge ship that hit an iceberg in 1914, which was 16 years after this book was published. And so there are a whole bunch of similarities. For example, both of them collided with an iceberg near midnight in the North Atlantic, which was 400 miles from the Newfoundland, and they both hit the iceberg because they were speeding. Both had too few lifeboats. Both were launched in April. They both were described as unsinkable, and they were huge, massive ships. In fact, they were the largest that were afloat. They both had exactly a capacity of 3,000, and both had 3 propellers and 2 masts. And of course, the name, the Titan and the Titanic, were very similar. And this is almost like foreseeing what happened to the Titanic. And even the differences between the Titan and the Titanic were not so different. For example, the top speed of the Titan was 25 knots, and for the Titanic it was 22.5 knots. And the Titan was 800 feet long and weighed 45,000 tons, whereas the Titanic was 882 feet long and weighed 46,328 tons. Now, what's interesting is that the Titan sailed from New York to Liverpool, whilst the Titanic sailed from Southampton to New York. So they were traveling in opposite directions, but from almost the exact same place, from England to New York, and New York to England. It was the Titan's 3rd voyage, but the maiden voyage for the Titanic, so its very first voyage. The Titan had a horsepower of 40,000 and the Titanic 45,000. So obviously the author knew something about ships, but just the fact that they were named almost exactly the same, they both were, these huge ships described as unsinkable. They both hit an iceberg in the exact same place and the exact same month and the exact same time, which was midnight. And so this is truly bizarre, and I suppose it could be just a coincidence, or perhaps it could be something else. It could be perhaps, he really did foresee this happening and did receive some kind of inspiration to write this book. So this is definitely one of the most interesting coincidences, I think. And it raises the question about whether people can actually foretell what happens in the future. I personally am not. I don't really believe in that kind of stuff, but when something like this happens, you have to wonder. And so those were the 2 most interesting coincidences that I've read about that were credible. I really enjoy reading about these kinds of things. It makes me think about, how much control we have over our lives and whether things are destined to happen. It's really interesting and fascinating to me. Let me know what you think. I hope you enjoyed listening to these, and thanks for listening. Bye.